Harlequin's Heart, Part 1. This is a true story about the doll that murdered my uncle and nearly possessed my little brother. I've spent 15 years trying to forget what happened, but some nightmares don't end when you wake up. What I'm about to share contains disturbing details that continue to haunt me. This isn't for the faint of heart. When you live in the outskirts of Guanajuato, Mexico, where police take 45 minutes to arrive if they come at all, you learn quickly that you can only rely on yourself. By the time help arrives, it's usually too late. I was 8 years old when Valentino entered our lives. That's not his real name. Names have power, and I won't make that mistake again. But I need to tell this story as a warning, because he's still out there looking for his next child. July 7th, 2008 was supposed to be a day of celebration, my brother Miguel's second birthday. Instead, it marked the beginning of our nightmare. I remember every detail with painful clarity, like a wound that refuses to heal. Rain battered our 2-story house with unusual ferocity for July. Thunder shook the windows and lightning illuminated the hills surrounding our home. Our modest house stood isolated among the sprawling countryside, the nearest neighbor nearly half a kilometer away. The isolation never bothered me until that day. "Isabella, can you watch Miguel while I finish the cake?" My mother Elena called from the kitchen. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes from working night shifts at the hospital. Since my father, Rafael, had lost his construction job 3 months earlier, she'd been taking double shifts to keep us afloat. "Yes, Mama," I replied, abandoning my cartoon to sit beside my little brother. Miguel was playing on the living room floor, stacking colorful wooden blocks. He was an unusually quiet child, rarely crying or fussing. My mother often said he was the easiest baby she'd ever seen. "Bella, play," Miguel demanded with his limited vocabulary, pushing a block toward me. I had just begun building a small tower when the doorbell rang, barely audible above the rain hammering our roof. My father emerged from his study where he'd been looking for jobs, but more likely nursing the tequila bottle he kept hidden in his desk drawer. "Who could that be in this weather?" he muttered, running his fingers through his disheveled hair before opening the door. Standing on our porch was an elderly woman I'd never seen before. She was small, almost fragile, with stark white hair pulled back in a tight bun. Despite the downpour, she seemed barely wet, as though the rain avoided her. She wore a simple black dress with a deep purple-red shawl draped around her thin shoulders. "Can I help you?" my father asked, his voice conveying surprise and a hint of suspicion. "Señor Ortega, I am Señora Carmen," she said in a raspy voice that reminded me of dry leaves scraping concrete. "I worked with your mother before she passed. I heard today was your son's birthday and I wanted to bring a gift." My father hesitated, then stepped aside. "Please come in from the rain." My mother emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her hands and forearms. "Oh, welcome, Señora. Rafael, who is our guest." "She says she knew my mother," my father explained, though I caught the confusion in his voice. My grandmother had died years before I was born, and he rarely spoke of her. "I'm Elena Rafael's wife," my mother said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Would you like some coffee? The cake isn't ready yet, but—" No, Señora Carmen interrupted. "I cannot stay. The roads will flood soon." She reached into a large cloth bag she carried. "I only came to bring this." From her bag, she withdrew a package wrapped in red paper. As she held it, I noticed a strange smell emanating from her, like damp earth and something else I couldn't identify. Something ancient. "For the boy," she said, her dark eyes finding Miguel, who had abandoned his blocks and was staring at her with unusual intensity. My mother accepted the gift with a polite smile. "Thank you, Señora. That's very kind. Are you sure you won't stay?" "No, I must go before the storm worsens." Her eyes swept over our home, lingering on family photos, as if memorizing our faces. Then she looked directly at me. "Be a good sister, Isabella. Watch over your brother." Ice shot through my veins. I hadn't told her my name. Before I could point this out, she turned and disappeared into the rain. My parents exchanged puzzled glances, but ultimately shrugged it off as my father closed the door. "That was odd," my mother said. "I didn't know your mother had colleagues still in the area." "Neither did I," my father admitted. "Maybe she was confused." My mother set the package on the coffee table. "Well, let's see what she brought for Miguel." Miguel scrambled over immediately as if drawn by an invisible force. I helped him tear away the wrapping paper, revealing what lay inside. It wasn't a typical child's toy. It was a harlequin doll, meticulously crafted with attention to every detail. Standing about 12 inches tall, it wore the traditional diamond-patterned costume in red and blue. Its porcelain face was painted with exquisite care, rosy cheeks, a permanent smile, and the most striking blue eyes I'd ever seen. On its head sat a three-pointed jester hat with tiny silver bells at each tip. "My goodness," my mother breathed, lifting the doll. "This must be an antique. Look at the craftsmanship." Miguel reached for it eagerly, his eyes wide with fascination. When my mother handed him the doll, the bells jingled softly, creating a sound that somehow felt both cheerful and discordant in our quiet living room. "What a strange gift for a 2-year-old, my father remarked. "It looks valuable." "We should give it a name," my mother suggested, seemingly enchanted by the doll's appearance. "What do you want to call it, Miguel?" My brother studied the doll with unsettling focus. Then, with perfect clarity, far better pronunciation than his usual toddler speech, he said, "Valentino." My parents exchanged surprised looks. "Valentino," my father repeated. "Where did you learn that name, mijo?" Miguel didn't answer. He simply hugged the doll tighter, a smile spreading across his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. Something about the doll made my skin crawl, the way its eyes seemed to track movement around the room, the cold, hard texture of its porcelain skin when my fingers accidentally brushed against it. But I dismissed these feelings as childish imagination fueled by the storm and the strange circumstances of its arrival. That was my first mistake. The changes in Miguel were subtle at first. He became even quieter than before, spending hours in corners of the house with Valentino, whispering to it in conversations none of us could hear clearly. The doll went everywhere with him, meals, bath time, bed. He refused to be separated from it even for a moment. About 2 weeks after Valentino's arrival, I walked past Miguel's room and heard him speaking in full, complex sentences, something he'd never done before. "They don't understand," I heard him say clearly. "But you do. You always understand." I pushed the door open. "Miguel, who are you talking to?" He looked up. Valentino clutched to his chest. "Nobody," he answered in his normal, limited speech pattern. "Just playing." The contrast was jarring enough that I mentioned it to my parents that evening. "He's just developing quickly," my mother said dismissively. "Children his age absorb language like sponges. He's probably repeating phrases he heard on TV." But we didn't let Miguel watch much television, and the sophisticated vocabulary I'd heard wasn't from any children's show. Other odd things began happening around the house. Items would disappear, only to reappear days later in unexpected places. The house developed cold spots, particularly near Miguel's room. And sometimes late at night I'd swear I heard the faint jingling of bells moving through the hallway when Miguel was supposedly asleep. "It's just the wind," I told myself, when I mentioned the sound to my mother and saw her worried expression. "The wind coming through the cracks is making the bells on Valentino's hat ring." But the windows were closed and there was no wind that night. Miguel began drawing disturbing pictures, dark, shadowy figures with elongated limbs and misshapen heads. When my mother asked what they were, he would simply say, "The real faces Valentino shows me." My parents became concerned enough to take Miguel to a doctor who suggested he might have developmental issues or possibly be on the autism spectrum. They recommended specialist tests, evaluations, all of which we couldn't afford with my father still unemployed, and increasingly turning to alcohol to dull his sense of failure. The night everything escalated was exactly 1 month after Miguel's birthday, August 7th, 2008. I woke suddenly at 3:13 a.m. I remember the time precisely because I glanced at my bedside clock, its red numbers burning in the darkness. Something had pulled me from sleep, a sound, laughter. But not the innocent giggle of a child. It was deeper, almost adult-like, coming from Miguel's room across the hall. I slipped out of bed, my heart pounding as I crossed the hallway. Miguel's door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of moonlight spilling through his window and onto the floor. "Miguel," I whispered, pushing the door open further. The sight before me remains burned into my memory. Miguel sat cross-legged on his bed, Valentino positioned directly across from him. They appeared to be having a conversation, though Miguel was the only one speaking. Except the voice I heard wasn't entirely Miguel's. It fluctuated between his childish tone and something older, raspier. "He doesn't suspect anything," Miguel said in that strange, dual voice. "We can take care of him like the others." Then he laughed again, that horrible adult laugh that had awakened me. "Miguel," I called louder, my voice trembling. He turned toward me sharply, and in the moonlight I saw his eyes. They weren't the warm brown I knew. For just a moment, a heartbeat, they glowed blue. The exact same shade as Valentino's painted eyes. Then he blinked and they were normal again. "Bella?" he said, suddenly sounding like himself. "What are you doing?" I heard you talking," I stammered. "Who are you talking to?" Miguel glanced at Valentino, then back at me. "Just playing," he said innocently. "Go back to sleep." "It's the middle of the night, Miguel. You should be sleeping too." "Valentino doesn't want to sleep," he replied. "Valentino wants to play." A chill ran through me. "Well, tell Valentino it's sleep time now, for everyone." Miguel's expression darkened. Valentino doesn't like being told what to do. The way he said it so cold, so unlike a 2-year-old, made me take a step back. "Good night, Miguel," I whispered, and quickly retreated to my room. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. How could I, when every time I closed my eyes, I saw my brother's face illuminated by moonlight with eyes that weren't his own? The next morning, I tried to talk to my parents about what I'd seen. "Miguel was awake at 3 in the morning talking to that doll," I explained over breakfast, "and his voice sounded different." My mother sighed, dark circles under her eyes from another late hospital shift. "Isabella, it was probably just a dream." "It wasn't, and his eyes looked blue for a second like Valentino's." My father lowered his newspaper. "Enough ghost stories, Isabella. Your brother's going through some developmental issues and your imagination isn't helping." I fell silent, watching as Miguel entered the kitchen, Valentino clutched in one arm. He moved to his booster seat, carefully positioning the doll on the empty chair beside him. "Buenos dias," my mother said, kissing the top of Miguel's head. "Did you sleep well?" Miguel nodded, not looking at me. "Valentino needs breakfast too," he said seriously. My mother smiled indulgently and placed a small, empty plate in front of the doll. This had become routine, though Valentino never ate anything. Still, Miguel would sometimes move a spoon toward the doll's painted mouth, then back to the plate as if feeding it. "I think we should get rid of that thing," I whispered to my mother when Miguel was distracted. Her expression hardened. "Isabella, that doll is the only thing keeping your brother calm lately. Let him have this comfort. He'll outgrow it eventually." But Miguel didn't outgrow it. If anything, his attachment grew stronger, more obsessive. And stranger things began happening around our house. One afternoon, about a week later, I was doing homework in my room when I heard the distinct jingle of Valentino's bells in the hallway. I knew Miguel was downstairs with my mother, so the sound made no sense. I opened my door cautiously, half expecting to see Miguel sneaking around. The hallway was empty, but the sound continued, moving away from me toward the stairs. I followed it, heart pounding. At the top of the stairs, I froze. There, descending the steps one by one, was Valentino, moving on its own, its porcelain legs bent and straightened in a jerking motion as it made its way downward, bells jingling with each step. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only watch in paralyzed horror as the doll reached the bottom step, turned its head, its entire head, not just the eyes, and looked directly at me. Its painted smile seemed wider, somehow more knowing. Then it disappeared around the corner. When I finally regained control of my limbs, I raced downstairs frantically searching for the doll. I found Miguel in the living room, Valentino in his lap, both exactly where they should be. "Everything okay, Bella?" my mother asked, noticing my panic. I thought I couldn't explain what I'd seen. They already thought I was jealous of Miguel's attachment to the doll. Claiming it walked on its own would only make me sound more desperate for attention. "Nothing," I mumbled. "Just thought I heard something." That night I double-checked that my bedroom door was locked before going to sleep. Things deteriorated rapidly after that. Miguel began having tantrums when my parents tried to separate him from Valentino, even briefly. He'd scream until his face turned purple, repeating the same phrase, "He needs me, he needs me." My father's drinking worsened, and my parents argued more frequently, their voices carrying through the thin walls of our house. The financial strain, Miguel's concerning behavior, and the increasingly oppressive atmosphere of our home weighed on all of us. My mother's solution was to work even more hours, leaving me alone with Miguel and my father for longer stretches. And though she never said it, I knew she was avoiding coming home. I couldn't blame her. Something had changed in our house. The air felt heavier, charged with a malevolence I couldn't name but could certainly feel. Random cold spots appeared. Doors opened or closed by themselves. And always there was the faint sound of bells jingling in empty rooms. The breaking point came when my father's younger brother, Uncle Carlos, came to stay with us after losing his apartment in a divorce. He moved into the spare room downstairs, bringing much-needed life and energy to our increasingly gloomy home. "So this is the famous Valentino I've been hearing about," Uncle Carlos said cheerfully, kneeling to greet Miguel on his first day with us. He reached out to touch the doll's hat. Miguel jerked the doll away violently. "No, don't touch him." Uncle Carlos raised his hands, taken aback. "Sorry, little man. Didn't mean to upset you." "Valentino doesn't like strangers," Miguel said coldly in that unnervingly adult voice. "Miguel, be nice," my mother admonished. "Uncle Carlos is family." "Not to Valentino," Miguel muttered, retreating to a corner with the doll. That night I woke to screaming. I bolted upright, heart racing. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:13 a.m., exactly the same time I'd awakened to hear Miguel talking to Valentino weeks earlier. More shouting erupted from downstairs, followed by the sound of running footsteps. I crept to my door and opened it cautiously. My parents were already rushing down the stairs, my mother hastily tying her robe. "Carlos, what's happening?" my father called out. I followed them, careful to stay in the shadows of the staircase where they wouldn't notice me. Uncle Carlos stood in the middle of the living room wearing only boxer shorts and a t-shirt, his face ashen. In his hand he clutched a garden shovel like a weapon. "There was something in the yard," he gasped, his voice quavering. "Looking up at Miguel's window. I thought it was an animal at first, but—" "Carlos, calm down," my father said, approaching him cautiously. "What did you see?" Uncle Carlos pointed a trembling finger toward the back door. That doll. The one Miguel carries everywhere. It was outside, standing under the window, looking up. But it wasn't. It wasn't just a doll. When it turned and saw me..." He shuddered violently. "Its face, Raphael. Its face wasn't right." My mother exchanged worried glances with my father. "Carlos, you must have been dreaming. Miguel's doll is upstairs with him where it always is." "I wasn't dreaming," Uncle Carlos insisted. "I went outside with the shovel and it ran into the bushes. I swung at it and—" He looked down at the shovel in his hands and I noticed something dark staining its edge. "I hit something. Something that screamed." A heavy silence fell over the room. "Let's check on Miguel," my mother finally said. "Make sure everything is all right upstairs." While they headed up to Miguel's room, I slipped back up the stairs and into the hallway bathroom, hiding from view. Through the crack in the door, I watched my parents enter Miguel's bedroom. Seconds later, my mother emerged, her face drained of color. "Raphael," she whispered urgently, "the doll isn't there." My blood ran cold. I waited until my parents had gone back downstairs before creeping toward Miguel's room. The door was ajar, and I could see my brother sleeping peacefully in his bed. But Valentino, who was always beside him, was nowhere to be seen. As I stood there frozen in indecision, I heard the faint jingling of silver bells coming up the stairs. I pressed myself against the wall, too terrified to move, too terrified to breathe. The jingling grew louder, closer. And then I saw it. Valentino climbing the last step. But he was different. One of his porcelain legs was missing, the fabric torn where it had been attached. The damage exposed something underneath that wasn't stuffing or porcelain, something red and wet that glistened in the dim light. The doll dragged itself across the hallway, leaving a faint, dark smear on the hardwood floor. It paused outside Miguel's room, its head turning toward me. Its eyes were no longer painted blue. They were real eyes, glowing red in the darkness, filled with a malevolence that paralyzed me. "He needs me," the doll whispered in a voice like cracking ice, "and I need him." Then it disappeared into Miguel's room. I don't remember returning to my bedroom. I don't remember falling asleep. But I must have, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my window, and the events of the night seemed like a terrible nightmare, except for the dark smear on the hallway floor that nobody else seemed to notice, and the fact that when Miguel came down for breakfast, Valentino was with him intact, perfect except for one missing leg. "What happened to your doll?" my mother asked, noticing the damage. Miguel's face darkened and he glanced at Uncle Carlos, who was nursing a cup of coffee at the table, still looking shaken from the night before. "Valentino got hurt," Miguel said quietly. Then, with a smile that sent ice through my veins, he added, "But he'll be okay. And he says Uncle Carlos won't bother us anymore." That's when I realized something was terribly wrong with Valentino. But I couldn't have known the truth was far more horrifying than anything I could imagine, and that soon our family would never be the same. The Harlequin's Heart Part 2. 3 months after Valentino entered our lives, our house had transformed from a home into something else, a prison where shadows grew longer. Silences stretched heavier and unexplained sounds became our nightly lullaby. Miguel and Valentino had become inseparable in the most disturbing way. My brother refused to let the doll out of his sight for even a moment. He wouldn't bathe unless Valentino sat on the bathroom counter watching. He wouldn't eat unless the doll had its own plate. And most alarmingly, he wouldn't speak to any of us directly anymore. He'd whisper to Valentino first, then relay what the doll said to whoever needed an answer. "Miguel needs to spend some time away from that thing," my father declared one night after my brother had gone to bed. Dark circles had formed under his eyes, and the liquor in his glass couldn't mask the fear in his voice. "It's not healthy." My mother nodded, her face lined with exhaustion and worry. "We could try while he's napping tomorrow. Just put it away for a little while." I sat silently on the stairs, eavesdropping. Part of me wanted to rush in and tell them everything about the doll moving on its own, about the blood I'd seen that night, about the whispers I heard through the walls. But they already thought I was making up stories for attention. What would one more wild tale accomplish? The next day, while Miguel slept soundly during his afternoon nap, my mother carefully extracted Valentino from his arms. My brother stirred but didn't wake. Moving silently, she carried the doll to her bedroom and locked it in the bottom drawer of her dresser. "There," she whispered when she returned to the living room. "Let's see if a little separation helps." It didn't. When Miguel awoke and discovered Valentino missing, the screams that erupted from his tiny body sounded inhuman. He tore through the house like a tornado, upending furniture, sweeping books from shelves, his face contorted in rage. "Valentino!" he shrieked over and over. Give him back now!" My parents tried to calm him, but Miguel was beyond reason. His eyes rolled wildly and foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. When my father attempted to hold him, Miguel bit his arm so hard he drew blood. "Jesus Christ!" my father yelled, releasing him. "Elena, this isn't normal. Something is wrong with him." After nearly 2 hours of Miguel's relentless screaming and destruction, my mother finally relented. With trembling hands, she retrieved Valentino from the drawer. The moment Miguel saw the doll, an eerie calm descended. His screams stopped instantly. Tear tracks still stained his flushed cheeks, but his expression had transformed into one of serene happiness as he clutched Valentino to his chest. "They tried to separate us," I heard him whisper to the doll. "They tried to keep us apart." That night, all the clocks in our house stopped at exactly 3:13 a.m. We discovered this the next morning, digital clocks blinking the same numbers, analog hands frozen in place. Even my father's expensive wristwatch, a gift from my grandfather, had stopped at precisely that time. "Must be some kind of power surge," my father muttered unconvincingly as he reset them. I knew better. Something had marked our house, claiming territory, establishing dominion over time itself. Uncle Carlos tried his best to bring normalcy back to our home. He'd play card games with me in the evenings, help my father with repairs around the house, and tell jokes during dinner. For brief moments, his presence would make us forget the heaviness that had settled over everything. But Miguel refused to warm to him. My brother would watch Uncle Carlos with cold, calculating eyes, clutching Valentino protectively whenever he came near. "Come on, little buddy," Uncle Carlos tried one afternoon, kneeling beside Miguel. "Let me teach you a simple card game. It'll be fun." Miguel stared at him silently for an uncomfortably long moment. Then, without warning, he swept his arm across the table, sending the cards flying. "Valentino doesn't like you," he said flatly. Uncle Carlos chuckled nervously. "Well, I'm sure Valentino and I can become friends with a little time." Miguel's expression didn't change. "No, you can't." Later that evening, I found Uncle Carlos in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of my father's tequila with shaking hands. "You okay, Uncle Carlos?" I asked. He startled, nearly dropping the bottle. "Isabella, I didn't hear you come in." "Sorry," I said, climbing onto a stool across from him. "Are you scared of Miguel?" His eyes darted to the doorway, checking if we were alone. "Not Miguel," he said quietly. "That thing he carries everywhere." My heart pounded. Finally, an adult who believed. "Valentino," I whispered. "I've seen it move, by itself." Uncle Carlos drained his glass in one swallow, then poured another. "I thought I was imagining things. Your parents think I'm crazy, but I've seen it too. Last night I woke up to use the bathroom, and I swear I saw it sitting on the kitchen counter just watching me." "No one believes me either," I said, tears welling up. "Mom and Dad think I'm jealous of Miguel, but there's something wrong with that doll. It's evil." Uncle Carlos reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I believe you, Sabrina, and I'm going to help figure this out." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. That hope was short-lived. 2 nights later, I awoke to the sound of shattering glass and a man's terrified shout. I ran to my window, which overlooked the backyard, and saw Uncle Carlos standing in the grass, that same garden shovel gripped in his hands like a weapon. He was wearing only boxers and a t-shirt, his body rigid with fear as he scanned the darkness. I strained my eyes, trying to see what had frightened him. Then movement caught my attention, something small darting between the shadows near our back fence. The moonlight briefly illuminated a flash of red and blue diamond patterns before it disappeared into the bushes. Uncle Carlos charged forward, raising the shovel high. I heard a sickening thud as metal met something solid, followed by a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. A high-pitched, inhuman shriek of pain that was neither animal nor child. I pressed my hands against my ears, but I couldn't block it out. The sound vibrated through my bones, making my teeth ache and my stomach turn. When I dared look again, Uncle Carlos was backing away from the bushes, the shovel slipping from his trembling hands. He stumbled toward the house, his face ashen in the moonlight. I raced back to bed, pulling the covers over my head just as I heard my parents rushing downstairs to investigate. Through the thin walls, I could make out Uncle Carlos's frantic explanation, my father's skepticism, my mother's concern. I'm telling you, that thing is alive. It was looking up at Miguel's window, and when it saw me, its face changed. Carlos, you need to calm down, my father said. You've had too much to drink. Miguel's doll is upstairs in his room where it always is. Check, Uncle Carlos insisted. Check right now. I heard footsteps on the stairs, doors opening and closing. Then my mother's frightened voice, Raphael, the doll isn't here. More urgent footsteps. Hushed, panicked conversation. I pressed my ear against the wall, straining to hear. Miguel's sound asleep, but the doll is gone, my mother whispered. That's impossible, my father insisted. It has to be somewhere in the room. We looked everywhere. It's not there. I held my breath, listening for what would happen next. But instead of more searching or discussion, I heard something else, the soft, familiar jingling of tiny silver bells coming from the hallway. Slowly, I crept to my door and cracked it open just enough to peek through. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Valentino was crawling up the last step, pulling himself along with jerky, unnatural movements. One of his legs was missing entirely, revealing not stuffing, but something that glistened wetly in the darkness, something that left a dark smear on the hardwood floor. The doll paused at the top of the stairs, its head rotating a full 180 degrees until it faced my partially open door. Its painted eyes had changed. They were deeper now, glowing with a dull red light, and they locked directly onto mine. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even close my eyes as the doll's mouth, which should have been painted and immobile, stretched into a wider smile, revealing tiny, needle-sharp teeth. Then, as if satisfied that I had seen it, Valentino turned and dragged itself toward Miguel's room, disappearing inside. I slammed my door shut and pushed my desk chair against it, then huddled in the corner of my bed, shaking uncontrollably until dawn finally broke. At breakfast, no one mentioned the night's events. My parents looked haggard, exchanging worried glances over their coffee cups. Uncle Carlos was nowhere to be seen. Miguel came down last, Valentino clutched in his arms. The doll looked exactly as it always had, except for one glaring difference. Its right leg was missing the fabric neatly sewn shut where the limb had been. "What happened to Valentino?" my mother asked, her voice tight. Miguel stroked the doll's head lovingly. "He got hurt," he said simply. Then, looking directly at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he added, "But he'll be better soon. And he says Uncle Carlos won't bother us anymore." A chill ran down my spine. "Where is Uncle Carlos?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "He left early this morning," my father said, not meeting my eyes. "Said he needed to pick up some things from his apartment. But Uncle Carlos's few possessions, a duffel bag of clothes, his phone charger, his wallet were still in the guest room. I checked when no one was looking. He never came back, never called, never sent a message. My parents filed a missing persons report 3 days later, but the police weren't particularly concerned about a recently divorced man disappearing. "Happens all the time," the officer told my father with a shrug. "They need space, start fresh somewhere else." A week passed, then 2. My parents spoke in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear their theories, growing more desperate. Maybe Carlos had relapsed into his old gambling habits. Maybe he'd reconciled with his ex-wife. Maybe he'd been embarrassed about his episode and decided to stay with other friends. But I knew the truth. I had seen the evidence smeared across our hallway floor that night. Valentino had done something to Uncle Carlos, and Miguel had known about it. One morning I overheard my parents discussing Uncle Carlos's bank accounts and credit cards, which showed no activity since his disappearance. My mother was weeping softly. "We have to consider the possibility that something happened to him, Raphael," she said. "People don't just vanish without a trace." "What are you suggesting?" my father demanded. "That he met with foul play here in our home." "I don't know. I just know that the Carlos I grew up with wouldn't abandon his family without a word, wouldn't leave all his possessions behind. Something is wrong." And what do you want me to tell the police, that my brother disappeared after claiming my son's doll was stalking him? They already think we're wasting their time. Their argument continued, but I stopped listening. A new, terrible thought had entered my mind. What if Uncle Carlos wasn't the first? What if Valentino had done this before? That afternoon, while my mother took Miguel to yet another doctor's appointment, I searched the house for Señora Carmen, the woman who had brought Valentino into our lives. My father had mentioned she knew his mother, so I dug through old photo albums and boxes of family memorabilia stored in the attic. Hours of searching yielded nothing. No photos, no letters, no mention of anyone named Carmen who had worked with my grandmother. It was as if the woman had never existed. As I was replacing the last box, something caught my eye, an old newspaper clipping that had fallen between two storage containers. It was yellowed with age, dated June 12, 1978, 30 years before Miguel's birthday. The headline read, "Local woman found dead under mysterious circumstances." The article described how a Carmen Vega, 67, had been discovered in her home after neighbors reported a strange smell. The cause of death was inconclusive, but authorities suspected foul play due to the ritualistic arrangement of objects around the body. Among her possessions, police had found a collection of antique dolls, including several harlequins. The article noted that Miss Vega had no known relatives, and neighbors described her as reclusive and odd. A chill ran through me as I stared at the grainy black-and-white photo accompanying the article. Though much younger, the face was unmistakable, the same hollow cheeks, the same penetrating eyes, the same thin lips pressed into a knowing smile. It was Señora Carmen, the woman who should have been long dead by the time she appeared on our doorstep. I was still holding the clipping when the phone rang. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the receiver. "Hello? Isabella." It was my mother, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Is your father there?" "No, he went to the hardware store." "What's wrong?" A pause. "Nothing. We'll be home soon." She hung up before I could ask more questions. When they returned an hour later, I knew immediately something had happened. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and Miguel looked unnaturally calm. Valentino clutched to his chest as always. "What did the doctor say?" I asked. My mother shook her head slightly, indicating we'd talk later. That night, after Miguel was asleep, my parents argued in fierce whispers in their bedroom. I crept to their door, pressing my ear against it. "Suggesting possession, Raphael, possession. As if we're living in the Dark Ages." "You're the one who wanted a specialist," my father retorted, "and now you're upset because you don't like his diagnosis." "It's not a diagnosis, it's superstitious nonsense. Multiple personalities, schizophrenia, those are diagnoses, but claiming our son is possessed by a demonic entity, that's not medicine." "Then how do you explain what happened in the office? The way he spoke to that psychiatrist, the things he knew?" My mother fell silent, and when she spoke again, her voice trembled. "I don't know. I just know our son needs help and we're failing him." I returned to my room, mind racing. What had Miguel done at the doctor's office? What had he said? And more importantly, what did the psychiatrist see that made him suggest something as extreme as possession? The following week, my parents attempted again to separate Miguel from Valentino. This time they waited until he was deeply asleep, then my father carefully extracted the doll and locked it in the trunk of his car. I woke to the now familiar sound of Miguel's screaming. But this time something was different. His voice kept changing, shifting between his normal, childish tone and something deeper, older, filled with a hatred that made my skin crawl. "Give him back," the child's voice. "You will suffer for this." The other voice, a voice that should never have emerged from a 3-year-old's throat. I huddled under my blankets, hands over my ears, as the tantrum continued for hours. Eventually, near dawn, silence fell. Cautiously, I ventured to the hallway and found my parents sitting on the floor outside Miguel's room, defeated. "We have to give it back," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look what it's doing to him." My father nodded mutely, his expression hollow. He stood keys in hand and went outside to retrieve Valentino from the car. When he returned, pale and shaking, I knew something was wrong. "It's gone," he said, voice barely audible. "The doll. It's not in the trunk." My mother stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible. You locked it in there yourself. I watched you." "I know what I did," my father snapped, fear making his voice harsh. "But it's not there now. The trunk is empty." As if on cue, Miguel's door opened. He stood there, Valentino clutched in his arms, a serene smile on his face. "Valentino came back," he announced calmly. "He always comes back to me." My parents looked at each other, terror etched into their features. For the first time I saw that they finally understood what we were dealing with, something beyond their comprehension, something that defied the natural laws of our world. After that night they stopped trying to take Valentino away. Instead, they began discussing moving to a new house, a fresh start in another city. Maybe whatever bound the doll to our home would break if we left. But deep down I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Valentino wasn't attached to our house. He was attached to Miguel. The night that changed everything started like many others. My parents had gone to bed early, exhausted from the constant strain. I was reading in my room, trying to lose myself in stories about normal children with normal lives. My door creaked open slowly without a knock. Miguel stood in the doorway, Valentino held in front of him like an offering. "Miguel," I set my book aside, "you should be in bed." "Valentino wants to talk to you," he said, his voice oddly flat. A shiver ran through me. "Valentino is a doll, Miguel. He can't talk." Miguel's expression didn't change as he stepped into my room uninvited. "He talks to me all the time. He tells me things, secret things." "What kind of things?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. "About the others, the ones before you." Miguel placed Valentino on the foot of my bed. "About what happens to people who try to keep us apart." I drew my knees up to my chest, creating distance between myself and the doll. "Miguel, this isn't funny. Take Valentino and go back to bed." "He's hungry," Miguel continued as if I hadn't spoken. "He gets so hungry, that's why he needs me." "Hungry for what?" I whispered, though part of me already knew the answer. Miguel's face split into a grin too wide for his small features, a grin that mirrored the painted smile on Valentino's porcelain face. "Hearts," he said simply. "He eats hearts. That's why they call him the Heart Eater." The room suddenly felt colder. I could see my breath fogging in the air between us. Did he eat Uncle Carlos's heart?" I forced myself to ask. Miguel nodded, expression eerily serene. "Uncle Carlos was going to take Valentino away. He saw too much. So Valentino had to stop him." Horror washed over me in icy waves. "Miguel, listen to me. That doll is doing something to you. It's making you think bad things, say bad things. We need to get rid of it." "You'll be next," Miguel said, ignoring my plea. But the voice that emerged wasn't entirely his anymore. It had deepened, gained an echo, as if something else was speaking through him. "He knows you want to separate us. He can smell your fear. He likes it." The doll on my bed hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, and yet somehow I sensed a shift in its attention, like a predator focusing on prey. "Miguel, please," I begged. "That's not you talking. Fight it. You have to fight whatever's controlling you." For a moment, just a heartbeat, I saw confusion flicker across my brother's face. His eyes, which had grown harder in recent months, suddenly showed vulnerability. "Bella," he whispered, his voice small and frightened. "I don't feel good. Something's wrong with me." I reached for him, desperate to pull him away from Valentino's influence. "I know, Miguel. I'm going to help you. We'll fix this together." But before I could touch him, Miguel's expression hardened again. He snatched Valentino from the bed and backed toward the door. "He's mine now," came that horrible dual voice again. "And soon your heart will be his too." The door slammed shut behind him, leaving me alone in the darkness, shaking with terror and grief. Because in that moment of clarity, I'd seen the truth. My little brother was still in there, somewhere trapped inside his own body, aware of what was happening but powerless to stop it. I had to save him. But how do you fight something that isn't bound by physical laws? Something that could disappear from a locked car trunk and reappear in a child's arms? Something that had already killed and would clearly kill again? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I formulated a desperate plan, one that would either free my brother or cost me everything. The next morning, I waited until my mother left for work and my father retreated to his study with a bottle. Miguel was in the backyard, sitting under the orange tree, having one of his one-sided conversations with Valentino. I observed them through the kitchen window, noting how Miguel would pause as if listening to responses only he could hear, nodding occasionally, sometimes laughing at jokes no one else could appreciate. What I was planning was dangerous. If I failed, Valentino would surely make good on his threat to take my heart. But if I did nothing, I'd lose Miguel forever. And who knew how many others would suffer once Valentino grew tired of him and moved on to a new child. I gathered what I needed, a pillowcase strong enough to hold the doll lighter fluid from the barbecue supplies in the garage, my father's Zippo lighter, and a metal trash can we used for burning garden waste. The plan was simple: wait until Miguel set Valentino down, grab the doll and destroy it before it could react. The execution, however, proved more challenging. Miguel never set Valentino down, not once. He carried the doll to the bathroom, held it while he ate lunch, clutched it as he watched cartoons. It was as if he or the thing inside him sensed my intentions. By late afternoon, I was beginning to lose hope. Soon my mother would return and my opportunity would vanish. I needed a distraction. I went to the kitchen and deliberately knocked a glass off the counter, sending it shattering across the tile floor. "Miguel?" I called, injecting panic into my voice. "I need help. I cut myself." I heard him running from the living room. He appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with concern, real concern, my brother's concern, not the cold calculation I'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Bella, where are you hurt?" "My hand," I lied, holding my fist closed as if clutching a wound. "I need a bandage from the bathroom. Can you get me one quickly?" He hesitated, glancing down at Valentino in his arms. "Please, Miguel," I begged, letting real tears fill my eyes. "It hurts so much." Something in my genuine distress must have reached the part of my brother still fighting for control. He nodded and set Valentino on the kitchen chair. "I'll be right back," he told the doll. Then he ran toward the bathroom. I had maybe 30 seconds. With shaking hands, I grabbed the pillowcase and lunged for Valentino, shoving the doll inside and pulling the opening tight. Immediately the fabric began to writhe and twist as if containing a living thing. A high-pitched keening emanated from within, not the sound of bells jingling, but a furious, inhuman shriek of rage. I ran for the back door, heart pounding in my ears. Behind me, I heard Miguel scream a sound of pure anguish that tore at my soul. But I couldn't stop now. Outside, I dumped the lighter fluid into the metal trash can, then upended the pillowcase, dropping Valentino into the puddle of accelerant. The doll was thrashing now, its limbs moving with impossible flexibility, its painted face contorted with fury. "This is for my brother," I said, flicking the Zippo to life, "and for Uncle Carlos." I dropped the lighter into the can. Flames erupted immediately, engulfing Valentino in a blue-orange inferno. And then came a sound I will never forget. A scream that couldn't have come from porcelain and fabric, a scream of agony and hatred that made blood trickle from my ears and birds flee from nearby trees. The doll writhed in its funeral pyre, its painted features melting and bubbling, its clothing blackening to ash. But its eyes, those terrible eyes that had shifted from blue to red, remained intact, staring at me with malevolent intelligence until the very end. I don't know how long I stood there watching the flames consume what remained of Valentino. Long enough for the sun to begin setting. Long enough for my parents to come looking for me. "Isabella Maria Ortega." My father's voice broke through my trance. "What have you done?" I turned to see my parents standing at the back door, expressions of horror on their faces. Behind them, Miguel sobbed brokenly, his small body shaking with grief. "I saved us," I said simply. "I saved Miguel." My father grabbed my arm roughly, pulling me away from the still smoking trash can. "Have you lost your mind? That was Miguel's favorite toy? Look what you've done to your brother? You don't understand, I insisted, tears streaming down my face. That wasn't a toy. It was something evil. It killed Uncle Carlos. It was going to kill me, too. My mother knelt beside Miguel, trying to comfort him. Isabella, that's enough. Your uncle is missing, not dead, and blaming a doll for it it's crazy. But even as they scolded me, I saw uncertainty in their eyes. They had witnessed too many unexplainable things in recent months to dismiss my claims entirely. That night, as punishment, I was sent to bed without dinner. But as I lay in the darkness, listening to Miguel's occasional hiccuping sobs through the wall, I felt no regret, only relief. It was over. Valentino was gone. My brother could begin healing now. I was wrong, so very wrong, because Valentino wasn't finished with us, not by a long shot. The Harlequin's Heart Part 3. 15 years passed after the night I burned Valentino, 15 years of relative normalcy that sometimes made me question my own memories. Had a porcelain doll really moved on its own? Had it really spoken through my brother? Had it really consumed my uncle's heart? The human mind is remarkably adaptable, given enough time. Even the most horrific experiences can be rationalized, diminished or tucked away in the darkest corners of memory. By the time I turned 23, I had almost convinced myself that much of what I remembered had been the product of a child's overactive imagination. Almost. I was in my final year at Mexico City University studying history with a specialization in folklore and mythology. My academic focus wasn't coincidental. While part of me had tried to forget Valentino, another part had been searching methodically, obsessively for answers about what had happened to us, what had happened to Miguel. Because while my brother had recovered after the doll's destruction, he was never quite the same. The cheerful, curious toddler had been replaced by a quiet, introspective boy who suffered from mysterious nightmares and occasional blackouts. The doctors diagnosed epilepsy, prescribed medications, and suggested therapy for what they termed childhood trauma of unknown origin. My parents never spoke about those months with Valentino. Never mentioned Uncle Carlos, whose disappearance remained unsolved. Never acknowledged the inexplicable events we had all witnessed. It was easier, I suppose, to pretend it had never happened. I couldn't afford that luxury. Not when I still occasionally woke to the phantom sound of silver bells jingling in empty hallways. The university library had become my sanctuary, a place where I could immerse myself in research without my parents' concerned glances or my therapist's probing questions. That afternoon in October, I was buried in the rare manuscript section, poring over a 17th century treatise on European demonology. "You're here late again, Miss Ortega?" observed Dr. Fuentes, the elderly librarian who had become accustomed to my unusual research interests. "Still chasing your folkloric obsessions?" I smiled tiredly. "Just following a lead, Dr. Fuentes. I found a reference to a specific entity in a Spanish text, but the details were frustratingly vague." "Perhaps I can help," he offered, adjusting his thick glasses. "What entity are you researching?" I hesitated. Even after all these years, saying the name aloud felt dangerous somehow. A spirit or demon called Valentino, sometimes referred to as the Heart Eater." Dr. Fuentes went very still, his wrinkled face draining of color. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked sharply. "In a text about Spanish colonial influences on indigenous beliefs." I lied smoothly. "Is it familiar to you?" He glanced around the empty library, then leaned closer. "That is not a name one should speak casually, Miss Ortega. Not all academic pursuits are safe." A chill ran through me. "You know something about it." It wasn't a question, but he nodded anyway. "Wait here." He disappeared into the restricted archives, returning several minutes later with a slender volume bound in faded red leather. No title adorned its worn cover. "This arrived in our collection in 1963, donated by the estate of an Italian exorcist who spent his final years in Mexico," Dr. Fuentes explained carefully, placing the book before me. It has never been catalogued in our system, for good reason. With trembling fingers I opened the book. The pages were brittle with age, the text handwritten in faded ink, a mixture of Latin, Italian, and Spanish that made deciphering it challenging. But on page 17 a name jumped out at me, Valentinus Cordifagus, Valentino the Heart-Eater. My blood ran cold as I translated the surrounding text. Among the most malevolent entities of the infernal realm is Valentinus the Heart-Eater, who takes the form of a harlequin to seduce children with mirth and merriment. Once he has gained a child's trust, Valentinus begins eliminating all who might separate them, consuming their hearts to gain power. When the child's body is strong enough, Valentinus takes complete possession, abandoning his harlequin form to walk in human flesh. The next paragraph described how the entity had first appeared in 16th century Venice during carnival season, possessing a series of children before a priest named Father Antonio Salvatore discovered a ritual to contain it within a specially crafted doll. The ritual bound Valentinus to the harlequin form but could not destroy him. The entity passed from child to child through the centuries, always seeking escape from its porcelain prison. My hands shook as I turned the page and found a crude illustration. A harlequin doll with diamond-patterned clothing, a three-pointed hat with bells and eyes that seemed to stare directly at the reader. It was Valentino, exactly as I remembered. "Where did you encounter this entity, Miss Ortega?" Dr. Fuentes asked quietly. "And please do not lie to me this time." I looked up at him, suddenly desperate to unburden myself to someone who might actually believe me. "When I was 8 years old, this doll came into our home. It did things, terrible things. It possessed my brother. It killed my uncle." I expected disbelief, perhaps even concern for my mental state. Instead, Dr. Fuentes nodded gravely. "And what became of the doll?" "I destroyed it," I said, "burned it completely." He shook his head slowly. "The doll is merely a vessel, Miss Ortega. The entity inside cannot be destroyed by fire alone." The implication of his words hit me like a physical blow. But my brother, he got better after I burned it. He returned to normal. Even as I said it, I knew it wasn't entirely true. Miguel had never fully returned to the happy child he'd been before Valentino. "The entity may have simply gone dormant," Dr. Fuentes said, gathering strength, waiting. Waiting for what? For its host to be ready. He tapped the open page. "Valentinus prefers children because they are easily influenced, but their bodies are too weak to contain his full essence. Adult bodies, however—" The library suddenly felt too cold, the air too thin. "Are you saying it's still inside my brother after all these years?" "I cannot say for certain, but I would be cautious." As if on cue, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from my mother. Miguel had another episode at school, coming home this weekend. I hadn't planned to visit home until the holidays, but the conversation with Dr. Fuentes left me deeply shaken. I packed a small bag that evening and caught the first bus to Guanajuato the next morning. The family home looked smaller than I remembered its once bright blue exterior, faded to a dull periwinkle. My father had attempted to maintain it, but financial struggles and my mother's declining health had taken precedence over cosmetic repairs. "Isabella," my mother embraced me at the door, her frame thinner than when I'd seen her at Easter. "I didn't expect you until tomorrow." "I finished my research early," I lied, scanning the entryway for signs of Miguel. "How's he doing?" Her smile faltered. "Better today. The doctors adjusted his medication again." She lowered her voice. "But he said strange things during this episode, things that reminded me of before." My stomach tightened. What kind of things? He spoke in that voice again, the one that doesn't sound like him. "And he mentioned Carlos." She crossed herself. "After 15 years, he suddenly starts talking about Carlos." Before I could ask more questions, the front door opened behind me. I turned to find Miguel standing there, backpack slung over one shoulder, looking every inch the normal high school senior. At 17, my brother had grown tall and lean with our father's broad shoulders and our mother's expressive brown eyes. His hair, cropped short at the sides but longer on top, was styled in the latest fashion. Nothing about his appearance suggested anything unusual, until he saw me. For just a moment, barely a heartbeat, something shifted behind his eyes. Something cold and calculating that didn't belong in a teenager's gaze. Then he blinked and it was gone, replaced by genuine surprise and warmth. "Bella," he exclaimed, dropping his backpack to hug me. "What are you doing home?" "Came to check on my favorite brother," I replied, forcing lightness into my tone while studying his face for any further signs of what possession. "Mom said you had a rough day yesterday." Miguel shrugged, suddenly interested in the floor tiles. "Just stress, finals coming up and all that." "Miguel," our mother said gently, "your sister came all this way. You don't need to pretend everything's fine." He sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it made my chest ache. It was just another seizure, no big deal. "You were speaking in Latin," my mother reminded him. "The school nurse recorded it. Where would you learn Latin?" Another shrug. "I must have picked it up somewhere. Maybe in that horror movie Antonio showed me last weekend." I caught his gaze. "What did you say in Latin?" Something flickered across his face, hesitation, perhaps fear. "I don't remember." "I never remember what happens during episodes." He grabbed his backpack. "I've got homework. Good to see you, Bella." He disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone with our mother and the growing certainty that Dr. Fuentes had been right. Valentino hadn't been destroyed that night 15 years ago. He'd merely changed tactics. That evening I insisted on helping Miguel with his calculus homework, a transparent excuse to observe him more closely. We sat at the kitchen table, textbooks spread between us while our parents watched television in the living room. "You don't have to babysit me," Miguel said, solving an equation with practiced ease. "I'm not going to have another seizure." "Can't a big sister want to spend time with her little brother?" I countered, watching him carefully. "Especially when said brother is apparently some kind of math genius now." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not a genius, just good with patterns." "Miguel," I began carefully, "do you ever think about, when we were kids, about the things that happened back then?" His pencil paused mid-calculation. "What things? You know what things?" He set the pencil down and met my gaze, his expression unreadable. "You mean Valentino?" Hearing him say the name sent ice through my veins. "Yes, the doll." "Why would I think about a toy I had when I was 3? He resumed working on the equation. "A toy you destroyed, if I remember correctly." "You do remember," I pressed. "I thought you said you were too young to remember anything from that time." "Mom and Dad told me the story often enough." His voice had grown flat, emotionless. "How you were jealous of my attachment to it. How you burned it while I napped. How I cried for weeks afterward." Anger flared in my chest. "That's not what happened." "No?" Miguel looked up, a strange half-smile playing on his lips. "Then what did happen, Bella? Tell me your version." "The doll was alive," I said bluntly. "It moved on its own. It spoke through you. It killed Uncle Carlos." He stared at me for a long moment, then burst out laughing. But the sound held no humor. It was hollow, almost mocking. "Wow. And they say I'm the one with mental health issues. Miguel, please." I reached for his hand. "I know how it sounds, but I was there. I saw what that thing did to our family, and I think it might still be inside you." His smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. "I think you should go back to Mexico City, Isabella. Go back to your books and your research and leave me alone." "Miguel." "I'm not possessed," he snapped loud enough that our parents briefly glanced our way from the living room. Lowering his voice, he continued, "I have epilepsy, a neurological condition, scientifically documented, medically treated epilepsy, not some demonic fairy tale you've concocted to explain away your childhood guilt." He stood, abruptly gathering his textbooks. "I'm finishing this in my room." "Wait," I pleaded. Just answer one question. In your seizure yesterday, did you say, in tenebris unum venite interpreta manducare cor meum et vos cum aeterna tenebris manducat intrat pater? Miguel froze, textbooks clutched against his chest. Where did you hear that? Is that what you said? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper that raised goosebumps along my arms. Some doors shouldn't be reopened, sister. For your sake, forget what you think you know. He left me sitting at the kitchen table, shaking, certain of only one thing: I hadn't imagined any of it. Valentino was still here, hiding behind my brother's eyes, waiting for something. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of wind through the trees outside my window had me sitting bolt upright, straining to hear the telltale jingling of silver bells. But the only sounds were the familiar ones of home, my father's muffled snoring, the ancient refrigerator's mechanical hum, the occasional passing car on the street outside. Around 3 a.m. I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, only to jerk awake what felt like minutes later. Something had changed in the room. The air felt heavier, charged with a presence I hadn't sensed in 15 years, but instantly recognized. I wasn't alone. Slowly, I opened my eyes. A figure stood at the foot of my bed, small, child-sized, silhouetted against the faint light coming through my window. "Miguel," I whispered, though I knew it wasn't him. The figure stepped closer, and moonlight-illuminated features I had desperately hoped never to see again. The diamond-patterned clothing, the three-pointed hat with silver bells, the porcelain face with its too-wide smile. Valentino. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only stare as the doll I had burned to ashes, the doll that couldn't possibly be here, tilted its head at an impossible angle. "Did you miss me, Isabella?" it asked in that dry, crackling voice I remembered from childhood nightmares. "You're not real," I managed to whisper. "I destroyed you." The doll's laughter sent splinters of ice through my heart. "You destroyed a vessel, nothing more." It took another step toward me. "I've had many vessels over the centuries. The doll was merely convenient." "Miguel," I said, understanding dawning, "you've been inside him all this time." "Not always at the forefront," Valentino admitted, climbing onto the bed with jerky, unnatural movements. "I had to retreat after your little bonfire, gather my strength. Your brother's mind was still too fragile to contain me fully. I tried to move away, but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. But now he's older. Now he's perfect." The doll crawled closer, its porcelain face inches from mine, strong enough to hold all of me, young enough to have many decades of life left to enjoy, its painted features twisted into a grotesque approximation of delight. "Do you know how rare it is to find a perfect host? Most burn out so quickly. Their hearts give out or their minds snap. But Miguel is special." "What do you want from me?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "Your brother misses you terribly when you're away at school," Valentino said, reaching out one tiny porcelain hand to touch my cheek. Its fingers felt cold as grave dirt. "It would be a shame if you never returned to Mexico City, if you, like your dear uncle, simply disappeared." I jerked away from its touch, finally breaking whatever paralysis had held me. "You won't hurt me. I won't let you." "Oh, Isabella," the doll sighed, shaking its head sadly. "You assume you have a choice." Then before my eyes, Valentino began to change its form, elongating features, shifting, melting like wax, until I was staring not at a doll, but at my brother. Yet the eyes remained wrong, glowing blue instead of warm brown, filled with ancient malice. "You see," said Valentino through Miguel's mouth, "I don't need the doll anymore. I have something much better now." I scrambled backward until I hit the headboard, nowhere left to retreat. "Miguel, fight him. I know you're in there." The thing wearing my brother's face laughed. "Miguel is sleeping. He has no idea what's happening right now. By morning he'll have no memory of our little chat, just another episode to add to his medical records." It leaned closer, and I could smell something rotten on its breath, like meat left too long in the sun. "I could take your heart right now, you know. Just reach in and pluck it out while you scream. but that would raise too many questions, make too much mess. It grinned, Miguel's familiar features distorted by Valentino's malice. No, your death needs to look natural. An accident, perhaps? Or maybe suicide. You have been researching such disturbing topics lately, developing such unhealthy obsessions. My parents would never believe I killed myself, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the terror flooding my veins. Your parents believe what's comfortable, it countered. They believed Miguel had nightmares, not possession. They believed your uncle ran away rather than was murdered. They'll believe whatever narrative causes them the least pain. It was right, and we both knew it. My parents had spent 15 years constructing an elaborate alternative reality rather than face what had really happened in this house. Why wait? I challenged, desperate to keep it talking, while I frantically searched for a weapon and escape anything. Why not kill me now if that's your plan? Because I want you to suffer first, Valentino said simply. I want you to know fear, real fear, the kind that hollows you out from inside. I want you to check every dark corner, flinch at every sound, question every shadow, and when you're finally broken with terror, when you've lost all hope, then I'll come for your heart. It stood, Miguel's body moving with an unnatural fluidity, and backed toward the door. Sleep well, Isabella, if you can. After it left, I remained frozen, ears straining for any sound in the hallway. Minutes passed before I dared move, sliding out of bed on trembling legs to lock my bedroom door. Not that a lock would stop Valentino, but the symbolic barrier provided a small measure of comfort. I didn't sleep again that night. How could I, knowing what lurked behind my brother's eyes? When morning finally came, I went downstairs to find Miguel at the breakfast table, cheerfully arguing with our father about a soccer match. He looked up as I entered, his smile warm and genuine, no trace of the malevolence that had possessed him hours before. Morning, Bella. Dad thinks Leon is going to crush America next weekend. Help me convince him he's delusional. I studied his face carefully, looking for any hint of the entity I'd encountered in the night. His eyes were normal, clear brown, bright with youthful enthusiasm. If Valentino was still there, he was hiding well. You okay? Miguel asked, noticing my scrutiny. You look like you've seen a ghost. The irony of his words almost made me laugh hysterically. Just didn't sleep well, I managed. Those university beds spoil you, our father teased, folding his newspaper. Your old mattress not good enough anymore. I forced a smile, playing along with the morning's pretense of normalcy while my mind raced. Valentino had been clear about his intentions. He would kill me just as he'd killed Uncle Carlos. But unlike my uncle, I knew what I was facing. I had time to prepare to fight back, but how do you fight something that isn't human, something that can hide inside a loved one, emerging only when it chooses? The answer came later that day when I was helping my mother clean the kitchen. On a high shelf, nearly hidden behind rarely used serving platters, sat a small bottle of holy oil, a souvenir from her Easter visit to the cathedral. Mom, I said casually, when did Miguel's seizures start getting worse again? She paused in wiping down the counter. A few months ago. Why, just curious. I reached for the bottle. What's this for? Oh, Father Jimenez blessed it at Easter. For protection? She smiled apologetically. You know, I've always been more traditional than your father. I turned the bottle in my hand, an idea forming. Can I borrow it? I have a friend at school who's going through a tough time. She might find comfort in it. My mother hesitated only briefly before nodding. Of course, take it if you think it will help. That night I kept the small bottle under my pillow, waiting for Valentino to make another appearance. But my room remained empty, silent, except for the occasional sounds of the house settling. The next night passed the same way, and the next. By the fourth night of my visit, I began to wonder if that first encounter had been a nightmare after all. Then, as I was preparing to return to Mexico City the following day, I heard something that stopped my heart, the faint jingling of silver bells coming from the bathroom at the end of the hall. Clutching the bottle of holy oil, I crept toward the sound. The bathroom door stood ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the darkened hallway. I pushed it open slowly, breath catching in my throat. Miguel stood before the mirror, but his reflection wasn't his own. Instead of my brother, the glass showed Valentino not as the doll, but as something else. Something with Miguel's basic form, but wrong in every detail. The skin too pale, the limbs too long, the smile stretched impossibly wide to reveal needle-sharp teeth, and the eyes, those terrible blue eyes, glowing like cold fire. Neither Miguel nor his distorted reflection noticed me at first. They were too engrossed in their conversation. "She knows," Miguel was saying, his voice strained. "She'll try to stop us." "She can try," replied his reflection in Valentino's rasping voice. "Others have tried before. Their hearts were delicious." "I won't let you hurt her," Miguel insisted, a tremor in his words. "She's my sister." The reflection laughed. "You don't have a choice, boy. You invited me in long ago, and now you belong to me." "I was a child. I didn't know." "Ignorance doesn't negate consent," Valentino said coldly. "You named me. You welcomed me. You are mine." It was then that the reflection noticed me standing in the doorway. Its impossible smile widened further. "Isabella," it purred. "Come to join our little chat?" Miguel spun around, his expression horrified. "Bella, run! He's stronger at night, he can." His words cut off as his body convulsed violently. He clutched the sink for support, knuckles white with the effort of remaining upright. When he looked up again, the warm brown of his eyes had been replaced by glacial blue. "Too late," said Valentino through my brother's mouth. "Miguel is taking a little nap now. It's just you and me." I uncapped the bottle of holy oil, my hand surprisingly steady, despite my racing heart. "Let him go." Valentino tilted Miguel's head, studying me with amused contempt. "Or what you'll sprinkle me with that?" He laughed. "I've faced exorcists with far more powerful weapons than a tourist trinket of blessed olive oil." "This isn't for exorcism," I said, moving closer. "It's a reminder." Before he could react, I flung the contents of the bottle directly into Miguel's face. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. Valentino screamed not with my brother's voice, but with the inhuman shriek I remembered from the night I burned the doll. Miguel's body crumpled to the floor, thrashing in agony, as the blessed oil smoked against his skin like acid. I dropped to my knees beside him, heart pounding with fear that I'd hurt my brother in my attempt to attack the entity inside him. "Miguel, Miguel, can you hear me?" For several terrible seconds he continued to convulse. Then gradually the movements subsided. When he opened his eyes, one was brown again, Miguel's eye, while the other remained that terrible glowing blue. "Isabella!" My brother gasped, his voice his own, despite the struggle evident in every syllable. "Help me! He's too strong!" "I'm trying," I promised, tears streaming down my face. "Tell me what to do." "Permission," Miguel managed through gritted teeth. I need permission to fight him. I invited him in. Only someone else's permission can give me the strength to push him out." The blue eye blazed with fury. "Silence!" Valentino's voice emerged from half of Miguel's mouth, creating a grotesque effect. "She can't help you. No one can." "What do I need to say?" I asked, ignoring Valentino's outburst. Miguel's hand, his hand, not Valentino's, gripped mine with desperate strength. Say my name, my full name. Give me permission to fight. Please, before he takes control again." I took a deep breath, looking directly into my brother's brown eye, ignoring the hateful blue one. "Miguel Eduardo Ortega," I began, voice strong and clear despite my fear. "My brother, my blood. I give you permission and strength to fight the entity possessing you. I give you permission to expel Valentino from your mind, soul, and body. With my love and my faith, I declare you free from the Heart Eater's control." A howl of rage erupted from Valentino, and Miguel's body began to convulse again, more violently this time, his back arching impossibly as he was torn between two forces, battling for control. I held on to him, trying to keep him from injuring himself as the bathroom fixtures rattled and the lights flickered. The air grew dense, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl and my lungs struggle for breath. "Fight him, Miguel," I urged. "He doesn't own you. He never did." My brother's screams transformed into something beyond human as his body contorted, his spine bending at an angle that should have broken it. And then, in a moment I'll never forget, something began to emerge from his mouth. Not a physical substance, but a shadow, a darkness deeper than the absence of light. It poured out like smoke, forming a vaguely humanoid shape above him before solidifying into something more defined, a figure in diamond-patterned clothing wearing a three-pointed hat. For a moment Valentino hovered there, separated from my brother, but not yet banished. His form flickered between the harlequin doll I remembered and something older, more primal, a twisted mockery of the human shape, with elongated limbs and too many joints. "This isn't over," the entity hissed, its voice like ice cracking. "I've waited centuries. I can wait longer. He's still mine." "No," I said firmly. "He belongs to himself. He always did. Now go." Valentino's form convulsed as if my words had physically struck it. Then, with a final shriek of fury, it shot toward the window and vanished into the night. Miguel collapsed, breathing heavily, but with both eyes returned to their normal brown. I gathered him in my arms, rocking him gently as I had when he was small. "Is he gone?" he whispered, voice raw from screaming. "For now," I answered truthfully. I couldn't bring myself to lie, not after what we just experienced. "But we'll be ready if he tries to come back." Miguel nodded weakly, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "I remember everything, Bella. Everything he made me do. Everything he made me say. All these years." Tears welled in his eyes. "Uncle Carlos. I remember what happened to Uncle Carlos. I held him tighter. That wasn't you. None of it was you." But I knew he confessed shame, evident in his voice. Part of me was always aware, always watching, even when I couldn't control anything. I tried to fight him, but I wasn't strong enough. "You are now," I assured him, helping him to his feet. "And you won't have to fight alone anymore." As dawn began to lighten the sky outside, we sat together on the bathroom floor, planning our next steps. Because both of us knew the truth, Valentino wasn't gone. Not really. He was out there, weakened but not destroyed, searching for a new vessel, a new child to corrupt. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. And when Valentino returned, as we both knew he would, we needed to be prepared to end him permanently, whatever it took, whatever the cost. 3 months had passed since the night we expelled Valentino from Miguel's body. 3 months of searching, researching, and preparing for what we both knew was coming. Miguel had decided against attending university that fall. Instead, he stayed home and helped me convert our father's old study into what our mother jokingly called our ghost hunting headquarters. If only she knew how accurate that description was. We'd gathered everything we could find about Valentino and similar entities, ancient texts, historical accounts, religious artifacts believed to have protective properties. We'd created a wall map tracking suspicious incidents in neighboring towns, unexplained disappearances, children with sudden behavioral changes, deaths with missing hearts. Our parents worried, of course. They thought I was dragging Miguel into my unhealthy obsession with folklore. They suggested therapy both individually and as a family. We declined. How could we explain that we were hunting the demonic entity that had possessed my brother for 15 years, the same entity that had murdered our uncle and nearly killed me? Some truths are too terrible to share even with those we love most. "Anything new?" Miguel asked, entering the study with 2 mugs of coffee. At 17, he looked older than his years. The battle with Valentino had left permanent shadows in his eyes. I gestured toward my laptop screen. "Maybe. 3 cases of children with unexplained behavioral changes in Silao, all within the last month." Miguel set my coffee down, peering over my shoulder at the local news article. "That's less than an hour from here." "This one stands out." I pointed to a small paragraph about a 5-year-old boy named Felix Mendoza who had begun speaking in languages his parents didn't recognize. His teachers report he's been drawing disturbing images and talking about faces underneath faces. Miguel's hand tightened around his mug. "That's how it started with me." "There's more." 2 accidents in his family this month, an uncle who fell downstairs and nearly broke his neck, and a grandmother hospitalized after a suspicious kitchen fire. He's eliminating potential interference, Miguel whispered. Getting rid of anyone who might notice what's happening to the boy? I nodded grimly. Valentino's found his new vessel. That night we made preparations to visit Silao the following day. We packed holy water, blessed salt, religious symbols from half a dozen faiths, and the few pages I'd managed to photograph from that ancient text in Dr. Fuentes' library. What we didn't pack was a strategy for actually defeating Valentino. Expelling him from a host was one thing we'd proven that was possible, but destroying him permanently, that remained elusive. I was checking our supplies one final time when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Father Dominguez, an elderly priest who had helped our father through his drinking problems years earlier, and who I'd reached out to about our situation. He'd been skeptical at first, but his years studying in Rome had given him an open mind about such matters. "Isabella," he greeted me, his voice grave. "I have information." My colleague at the Vatican Archives found something, a reference to a book called the Grimorio de Valentino. My heart raced. The Book of Valentino. What does it say? It contains a ritual, one that supposedly can bind the entity permanently. Where is this book? I demanded, already reaching for a pen. In the Vatican secret archives, but my colleague managed to send photos of the relevant pages. He paused, his reluctance palpable even through the phone. "Isabella, you need to understand this ritual. It's not something to be undertaken lightly." "What do you mean?" Another long pause. "To bind Valentino permanently, the ritual requires a willing vessel, someone who invites the entity in, then dies with it still inside them." The pen slipped from my fingers. "Suicide. Sacrifice," Father Dominguez corrected gently. "A soul willingly giving itself to trap evil. It's the ultimate act of spiritual warfare." My mind reeled with the implications. Someone would have to die to end Valentino forever, not just anyone, a willing host who would first allow themselves to be possessed. "There must be another way," I insisted. "If there is, it's not recorded in any text the Vatican possesses," he replied. "Isabella, please let professionals handle this. The Church has exorcists trained for these situations." "Will they get to Felix in time?" I challenged. "Before Valentino takes complete control?" His silence was answer enough. "Send me the pages," I said, "and pray for us, Father." That night sleep eluded me. I tossed in bed, the priest's words echoing in my mind. A willing vessel, a sacrifice. Who could make such a choice? The answer came at 3:13 a.m. when I jolted awake to find a shadow moving across my bedroom wall, a shadow with no source, shaped like a figure in a 3-pointed hat. "I know you're there," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Show yourself." The shadow rippled, deepening until it seemed to absorb all light around it. Then it spoke, its voice like distant thunder. "Isabella," it hissed, "always the brave one." I sat up, switching on my bedside lamp. The shadow remained darker now against the yellow light. "What do you want, Valentino?" A sound like dry leaves scraping together laughter. "You know where I am. You know what I've found. A perfect new vessel, untainted and receptive." "Felix," I said. "You won't have him. We're coming for you." The shadow pulsed. "I'm counting on it." It stretched across the wall, elongating until it loomed over my bed. "When you arrive, I'll show you why they call me the Heart Eater." With that, the shadow collapsed into itself and vanished, leaving only the faint echo of silver bells jingling in its wake. I was already dressed when Miguel knocked on my door minutes later. "You felt it too?" I asked, recognizing the alert fear in his eyes. He nodded. "He's getting stronger. And bolder, coming here directly. He wants us to come to Silao," I said, stuffing the last of my clothes into a bag. "It's a trap." "Obviously," Miguel agreed. "But we're going anyway, aren't we?" I nodded. "We have no choice." Dawn was breaking as we loaded our car. Father Dominguez had sent the promise pages photographs of ancient Latin text with crude illustrations depicting the binding ritual. I'd spent hours translating them, my stomach sinking with each decoded passage. The ritual was horrifically simple: lure Valentino into a willing host, recite the binding incantation, then ensure the host's death before Valentino could escape again. The host's soul would serve as an eternal prison for the entity trapping it between worlds forever. One life to save countless others. One sacrifice to end centuries of horror. I hadn't shown the full translation to Miguel yet. I couldn't bring myself to discuss the implications, not when I'd already made my decision. As we drove through the Mexican countryside, golden morning light spilling across the hills, Miguel broke our contemplative silence. "I read the pages while you were in the shower," he said quietly. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Miguel, if someone has to do it," he continued, voice steady, "it has to be me." "No," I said sharply. "Absolutely not. It makes the most sense, Isabella. I've housed him before. I know how he feels inside me. I know how to fight him, how to hold him." "You're 17, I protested. "You have your whole life ahead of you." Miguel turned to look at me, his expression serene in a way that broke my heart. What kind of life would it be, knowing I let someone else die in my place, knowing I could have ended this but didn't? "I won't let you sacrifice yourself," I insisted. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. You know that. I know that." He gazed out the window at the passing landscape. "Besides, I'm already connected to him." "It has to be me." We fell silent again, the weight of his words filling the car. I wanted to argue further, to forbid him from even considering such a sacrifice. But the truth was, his logic was sound. If anyone could hold Valentino long enough for the ritual to work, it would be Miguel. But I wouldn't accept it. I couldn't. As we neared Silao, the sky darkened unexpectedly, storm clouds gathering despite the clear weather forecast. Wind buffeted the car and lightning split the sky directly ahead of us. "He knows we're coming," Miguel observed, his voice unnaturally calm. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. In my pocket, I felt the weight of the syringe I'd prepared that morning, filled with a powerful sedative I'd stolen from my mother's medical supplies. My backup plan, my desperate alternative. The road ahead curved around a hill, revealing the small town of Silao in the valley below. Even from this distance, I could feel a wrongness emanating from it, a heaviness in the air that pressed against my lungs and made my skin crawl. "There's something I need to tell you before we arrive," Miguel said, still staring straight ahead. "Something I've never told anyone." I glanced at him, concerned by his tone. "What is it?" "The night you burned the doll, I wasn't asleep. I saw everything. I saw him escape the flames and come to me." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I could have resisted then. I was young, but I still had a choice. But I was afraid, so I let him in. Everything that happened afterward, Uncle Carlos, the years of torment, it's on me." "You were a child," I protested. "You couldn't have understood what was happening." He shook his head. "I knew enough. And now I have the chance to make it right." He turned to me, eyes shining with unshed tears and quiet determination. "Please, Isabella, let me do this. Let me end it." Before I could respond, my phone rang. Father Dominguez again. I put him on speaker. "Isabella, stop whatever you're planning," he urged without preamble. "The Vatican is sending a team. They'll be in Guanajuato by tomorrow." "Felix doesn't have until tomorrow," I replied. "We're already in Silao." "Listen to me," the priest insisted. "I've been researching further. The Grimorio isn't the only source on Valentino. There's an older text, one that mentions a previous attempt at the binding ritual in 1763. It failed because—" The call cut off abruptly as we entered the town limits. I tried redialing, but no signal reached my phone. "He's isolating us," Miguel observed. "Cutting off help." I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the dread pooling in my stomach. "We stick to the plan, find Felix, assess the situation, then decide our next move." As we drove deeper into Silao, the storm intensified, rain lashing the windshield in sheets. The streets were eerily empty, as if the entire town had gone into hiding. We located the Mendoza home, a modest two-story house at the edge of town, partially obscured by large oak trees now bending in the wind. No light shone from within despite the storm-darkened sky. "Ready?" I asked, parking across the street. Miguel nodded, his face set in determined lines. "Whatever happens next, Bella, remember that I love you, and I'm not afraid." Something in his tone made me reach for him, gripping his hand tightly. "This isn't goodbye. I won't let it be." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Some endings are written long before we recognize them. As we stepped out into the rain, I heard it faint but unmistakable through the storm's fury, the jingling of silver bells calling us forward to our fate. Valentino was waiting, and we were out of time.